Ramsey, Minister of Local Government and Community Development, Dr. the Honorable Nigel Clark, Minister of Finance and the Public Service, other members of the Cabinet, Dr. Angela Brown Burke, representing the Leader of the Opposition, Honorable Pernell Charles. I'm looking for the wig, but I don't see it. I think he's coming without it today. But I see Pernell Charles Jr. Welcome, Honorable Minister. Ministers of State, Reverend Astor Carlisle from Webster Memorial United Church, Excellencies and members of the Diplomatic Corps and the international organization community, members of the Senate and the Houses of Representatives, Mrs. Marsha Henry Martin, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development, and other permanent secretaries, His Worship, the Mayor, Councillor Delroy Williams, Mayor of Kingston and St. Andrew, and other mayors, Ms. Mariko Kagoshima, United Nations Resident Coordinator ad interim, Mr. Nawel Arenas, Deputy Chief, Regional Office for Americas and the Caribbean with the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, Mr. Ronald Jackson, Executive Director of the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CDEMA, Brigadier Raj Mason, representing the Chief of Defense Staff, Assistant Commissioner of Police Calvin Allen, representing the Commissioner of Police, executive heads, and public and private sector organizations and other stakeholders, the Interministerial Planning Committee and team members of the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development and its agencies, representatives of the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the launch of the official website for the 7th Regional Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction in the Americas and the Caribbean. Good morning. It's really good to have all of you here. A couple months ago, perhaps, I had the privilege of attending the Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction in Geneva, Switzerland. And it brought home to me how precariously perched the Caribbean is as a region for disaster risk management. And so urgent is the moment that if we don't act like yesterday, we're going to be completely wiped out. And it gives me great privilege and great honor to be here today to launch this platform. For the first time in the Caribbean, it will be held in Jamaica. That deserves a round of applause. My name is Emily Shields, and I'm going to be your moderator for the very brief formalities. So in 2009, it was Panama. 2011, it was Mexico. 2012, Chile. 2014, Ecuador. 2017, Canada. 2018, Colombia. And then 2020, it is going to be Jamaica, Montego Bay, St. James. So help me welcome at this time for the opening remarks and invocation, Reverend Astor Carlisle from the Webster Memorial United Church.
The remarks will take the form of a prayer. Let us go to God in prayer. Let us pray. Great and wonderful God, we praise your name. Although no human wisdom can discover you, no argument lead to you, no enterprise reveal you, your presence is felt in every arena of life. Your creative genius smiles at us every morning in the colors and the rhythms of our world. Your fingers paint the hues of our landscapes, our seas, our skies. We praise you for the beauty and the bounty of the Caribbean region, and we pray now your blessings upon the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development and their partners as they work for the sustainable health of our environment. Guide us as a people to treat tenderly and wisely with your good creation. Broaden our vision so that our planning may not only satisfy today's demands, but equally consider generations unborn. Help us to invest wisely, build sensibly, and operate honorably so that equilibrium may be experienced in our environment and equity in our relationships. Since we can do nothing well without you, bless the proceedings of this day and grant that all our efforts may redound to the safety of your people in the Caribbean and the Americas and the glory of your name. We pray these things for Christ's sake. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Carlisle. So we now ask the Mayor, His Worship the Mayor, Senator Councillor Delroy Williams, Mayor of Kingston, to bring welcome as we launch the website for the 7th Regional Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction in the Americas and the Caribbean for 2020. Here is Mayor Delroy Williams.
Madam Chair, Honorable Minister of Finance, Minister of Local Government, Minister Pernell Charles, Dr. Angela Brown-Burke, representing the leader of the opposition, mayors, councillors, members of staff of various agencies, members of the JCF, visitors, media, good morning. My job is easy today, but it will take the form of just a few, two issues to consider. So our focus ought to be geared towards long-term urban planning. And within this long-term planning, the development of contingency plans for different scenarios. This must be done in a holistic and integrated manner, working across different sectors and involving different stakeholders to create sustainability, livability, and resilience. And this is the first point of two, is that the approach has to be an integrated approach. Has to be integrated, and by integration, we are cutting across sectors. It's a multi-agency approach to problem solving. And it's multi-agency because of a simple reason, that our challenges, and from the perspective of the municipality, or urban challenges, but generally global challenges, are complex. They're complex in nature, increasingly complex. And the complexity demands an integrated approach and seamless coordination between government agencies and stakeholders. So the complexity of the issues we're faced with demands also digitization, which is important in terms of the integration of the agencies. And because digitization is a very funny term, because sometimes we look at digitization just in terms of enhancing productivity. But it's larger than that. Digitization offers us the opportunity to really master complexity. And that is where it is important for us. It is the mastery of complexity, which affords us the opportunity to solve complex problems. And indeed, our problems are quite quite complex. There's the design. Let's look at another design. For us, design is a powerful tool in the hands of government, because design can mold and shape behavior. So in our design, in our planning and design, we have to merge that with how do we use design. For example, designing housing schemes, housing projects. How do we use the design and master the design to shape behavior and to create strong communities and foster social cohesion and support networks within these communities? Because strong communities, strong support mechanisms, social cohesion, those are necessary, vital to disaster risk reduction. So disaster risk reduction is not merely about the robust physical infrastructure. It's bigger than just robust physical infrastructure. So it's important that we place a lot of emphasis as governments and key stakeholders in planning and in purposeful planning towards a particular end. As I close now, I would like to also, so I'm underscoring the importance of an integrated approach, a seamless coordination between agencies. And it's something that I must say that I see emerging from the position of Mayor of Kingston. I see emerging. Previously, it was difficult to get agencies to coordinate to resolving issues within the municipality and within the country. I see that becoming less of an issue, and I think we are maturing in that regard. And I think as a government, we have to continue to nurture this and to encourage it. The final point I would like to make is that cities, and I know we are not primarily about cities when we're talking about risk reduction, disaster risk reduction, but cities are vital to any disaster risk reduction campaign or measures, because majority of your population live in cities. And the forecast is that probably 90% of the world's population will live in urban centers. So I want us to see cities not merely as a function of city is really for trade networks and financial circuits. But they're not only nodes for trade networks and financial circuits, but they have a special second function, because cities are really producers of a particular kind of complex knowledge. So cities are the centers, or let's put it another way, cities make complex knowledge. And it's something that we can't go through now because my time has ended, but it's something for us to think about. But I've borrowed the term from Professor Saskia Sassen, but it's important. So our problems are complex. Disaster risk reduction, the global uncertainties that we are confronted with, and the issues that confront us as cities and as governments. And indeed, they are complex. I mean, just take crime, for example, quite complex. Not easy to resolve. So you require a certain complex knowledge to resolve those. And those are made within cities. Thank you very much. May you enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you so much, Mayor Delroy Williams. I mentioned that global platform for disaster risk reduction in Geneva, Switzerland. And the session I was the moderator for focused on the Resilience Imperative, Charting a Caribbean Development Pathway in the Face of Uncertainty. I've mentioned it because when this gentleman gave his presentation, I was shocked by how close we are to this great danger. And I hope, without adding much pressure, that when he comes, he can encapsulate for you the absolute emergency in which the Caribbean has found herself. To bring greetings now, therefore, is Ronald Jackson, Executive Director, Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CDEMA. No pressure, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Master of Ceremonies. I don't feel pressured at all. Let me first recognize the Honorable Desmond McKenzie, Minister of Local Government and Community Development, Honorable Dr. Nigel Clark, Minister of Finance and the Public Service, Ms. Angela Brown-Burke, who is representing the opposition, and of course, the Honorable, or should I say His Worship, the Mayor of Kingston. I will ask that you permit me to observe the protocols that were set in the opening, because if I go through that entire list, then I'm going to be in trouble, because I know I'm supposed to bring greetings, but I'm known to say a few words too many. And I wanted to add just a few to my comments, which I did not script, but to recognize the contributions of His Worship, myself being an urban planner who practiced very briefly in the field, but believe that that is the pathway to solving a lot of our challenges we're facing in terms of this issue of resilience and risk. So I was very much encouraged by your articulate encapsulation in those, as you said, 2 to 3 key messages. Friends, excellencies, representatives, media, in 1 year, the 7th Regional Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction in the Americas and the Caribbean will be convened in Montego Bay, Jamaica, during the period 8th to the 10th of July, under the theme, Building Economic Resilience in the Americas and the Caribbean. And I'm sure you're wondering, you've heard the term RP20, you've heard Regional Platform, and you're wondering, what is that? What is a Regional Platform? It's not simply a conference, it's a space where practitioners, in disaster risk reduction, stakeholders, actors across the whole of government, private sector, the academia, or elected officials come together to look at this particular issue, to celebrate some successes, but to share experiences so that we can all learn from each other and to take this back into our own spaces to address some of the challenges we face. But it's also an opportunity, I think, for us to create and foster new partnerships in our journey towards resilience. This event is significant, as this will be the very, very first time the regional platform will be held in the Caribbean, and it will be held within a CARICOM state. And I think that's a significant achievement that deserves a round of applause. The Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency is an institution of the Caribbean community, which is comprised of its organs, the Ministerial Council, and the Technical Advisory Committee, along with membership, which constitutes 18 member governments, inclusive of Jamaica. It is therefore a pleasure for me to support the government and people of Jamaica in hosting this event. Building resilience has been a central theme of CDEMA since the agency's establishment in 1991. And this is reinforced through the current Regional Comprehensive Disaster Management Strategy, which has the goal of safer, more resilient, and sustainable participating states. Over the years, the Caribbean region has been making some strategic strides in advancing disaster risk reduction and management. The Comprehensive Disaster Management Strategic Framework is promoted and being advanced throughout the region, and it has been officially recognized by UNDRR as a Caribbean Regional Framework for the implementation of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030, a blueprint for global actions in disaster risk reduction. In this regard, CDEMA has a strong ongoing collaborative relationship with UNDRR in harmonizing the performance monitoring framework of the Comprehensive Disaster Management Strategy to simultaneously support monitoring, evaluation, and reporting on the progress towards delivering on agreed results between the CDEMA strategy and the Sendai framework. And for that matter, we're looking at how it can be harmonized to better deliver on the reporting on the SDGs, to reduce complexities. CDEMA being mindful of the need to support greater efficiency in the reporting of our participating states and noting the strides, challenges, and opportunities, and the yet untold stories of progress within the Caribbean region, has been advocating with UNDRR for the Caribbean to host a regional platform recognizing the significant contribution the Comprehensive Disaster Management Strategy has made in advancing the intent of both the Sendai Framework commitments and its predecessor, the Hyogo Framework of Action. In acknowledgement of this demonstrative initiative and commitment to disaster risk reduction in the national, regional, and global arena, the CDEMA family is therefore pleased that Jamaica will be the first Caribbean nation to host this event. The region and Jamaica have been at the forefront historically of the disaster risk management discourse. Many of you may remember the Decade for Disaster Risk Reduction. Jamaica was central in that conversation. The framing of the Yokohama strategy. Then we had Franklin McDonald, who was head of ODPEM, and somewhere between NEPA and ODPEM, engaged in the conversation around the Yokohama strategy. We had the OTRS plus 10 event, OTRS event and the OTRS plus 10 event. And in the lead up to the Hyogo Framework of Action in 2005, we had the Kingston Declaration here that launched the Caribbean's input into the framing of the Hyogo Framework of Action. So I think it is fitting that the regional platform comes home to be hosted in Jamaica, Minister. Following the devastating impacts of the 2017 hurricane events and recognizing the complex vulnerability to various hazards in the Caribbean region, the heads of government of the Caribbean community has reinforced resilience as a central theme for the Caribbean. However, resilience must be transformational. We must be able to define it, and we must be able to chart our way towards it. And so Emily spoke about the experience in Geneva, and CDEMA has been piloting what we call the Caribbean Pathway for Resilience, built on five fundamental pillars: social protection for the poor and most vulnerable, enhancing economic opportunities, which are a companion. If you're going to pull people out of poverty, you have to create new economic opportunities. Enhancing critical infrastructure, recognizing that most of our losses is in the infrastructure sector. Looking at environmental resilience. We derive our wealth, well-being from our natural environment. It is a natural buffer to some of the hazards we face. And fifth, look in at operational readiness for response and recovery. It's going to be the order of the day. If you go back into history, to the 1700s, 1600s, you see reports of strong hurricanes impacting the Caribbean and causing loss of lives. So we've been facing it, we will continue to face it. So we have to plan to be able to deal with those eventualities. Resilience is not built overnight. And when we reflect on the planning agenda, you realize how far away we are from where we need to be in terms of well-built cities and communities. In focusing on rebuilding the countries affected by Hurricanes Irma and Maria, the Caribbean community at the donor conference held in New York in 2017 has declared a vision of the Caribbean being the first climate-resilient region in the world, and buttressed that through the desire of the region for a holistic approach to addressing risk from all hazards to achieve resilient development. This ambitious aspiration, as well as the goal of the Comprehensive Disaster Management Strategy, which also seeks to achieve safer and more resilient, sustainable Caribbean, demands critical attention. According to the Global Report on Economic Losses, Poverty, and Disasters between 1998 to 2017, published by the CRED in 2018, there are some key messages emerging that reinforces this Caribbean resilience imperative within the global context. One, the 2017 hurricane season was remarkable in terms of the number of Category 5 cyclones that swept in quick succession across numerous vulnerable Caribbean island states and made landfall in Central and North America as well. For the period 1998 to 2017, hurricanes that swept through the Caribbean and made landfall in the Americas caused the greatest economic losses of all climate-related disasters, both in absolute terms and in a percentage of gross domestic product. In fact, the heaviest cost of storms relative to the size of their economies fell on small island states in the Caribbean. This is why our story needs to be told. We're indeed a laboratory for disaster risk. Many of the solutions were also developed within the Caribbean. All of the top 10 worst affected countries, territories in terms of losses as a percentage of GDP, were small Caribbean countries and territories. In review of the last 2 decades, the impacts of hurricanes Irma and BVI, Maria in Dominica, Ivan in Grenada in 2004, Hurricane George in 1998 in St. Kitts and Nevis, Hurricane Erika in 2015 in Dominica, are all in the top 10 climate-related disaster losses as a percentage of GDP between 1998 and 2017. The figures are telling us something. This is not just a story of just relative losses, but absolute losses. It should be noted that absolute losses resulting from hurricanes Irma and Maria, Ike in 2018, Ivan in 2004, are amongst the top 10 climate-related disasters for absolute losses for 1998 to 2017 period due to their impact on the Caribbean and on the United States. We also recognize that it is not just the climate-related hazards, but it is all hazards. The country of Haiti has had significant impacts from the 2010 earthquake, but we also note that as a low-income country, Haiti has the highest average annual percentage losses relative to GDP and stands at 17.5%, reinforcing the link between disasters, development, and poverty. The Caribbean is often referred to as being located in the second most hazard-prone area of the world. The result for the last 2 decades is placing us amongst the most vulnerable based on economic losses from disasters. This has much to do with climate-related hazards. In fact, the Global Assessment Report 2019 calls climate change the great risk amplifier. The Caribbean, therefore, looks forward to RP20 as we see this as not only creating an opportunity to assess jointly with the participating countries of the Americas and the Caribbean the advances for building a resilient economies and societies, but also the ability to share the knowledge, the experiences gained, and to assess further actions and commitments towards disaster risk reduction. In placing it at the center of the conversation, the achievements and gaps in achieving resilient economies, we will become a part of a great movement which builds the resilience of communities and nations to disaster risk. I am therefore honored to bring greetings on behalf of the management, staff, the Council of Ministers, and the wider community of CDEMA this morning. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you in Montego Bay next year.
That has painted a picture, if you never had one before. Thank you so much, Ronald Jackson, Executive Director of CDEMA. Now we have a 3-minute or so presentation from Mami Mitsutori, Head of the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, which is based in Geneva, Switzerland.
In 2020, Jamaica will host the 7th Regional Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction in the Americas and the Caribbean, which will take place from the 8th to 10th of July. I would like to warmly invite you to this important event jointly organized by the Government of Jamaica, the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, and the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency. The regional platform will be held in the Caribbean for the first time in history and bring together governments, stakeholders, and representatives from across the Americas and the Caribbean. The focus will be on building resilient economies. This will be an opportunity to place Jamaica and the Caribbean region at the center of the discussion of the regional agenda for the coherent implementation of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction and the Paris Agreement, including adaptation to climate change towards the achievement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. While disaster mortality globally continues on a downward trend, the bulk of the human cost associated with natural hazards occurs in low and middle income countries where extreme weather events push millions into poverty and more than often leave them displaced for lengthy periods of time. In May of this year, the Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction made the social, environmental, and economic case for disaster risk reduction. Despite the abundant evidence that risk-informed decision-making builds resilience, action for risk-informed investment and development are too often the exception rather than the rule. This regional platform is an opportunity to spur greater ambition across the region to achieve the 7 global targets of the Sendai Framework. It will also allow the region to take stock of progress in developing national and local strategies for disaster risk reduction by 2020 in line with Target E of the Sendai Framework and the Regional Action Plan for the implementation of the Sendai Framework in the Americas and the Caribbean. I hope you will be able to join us, and I look forward to seeing you in Montego Bay, Jamaica in July 2020.
Thank you. Word there from the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction from Mami Mit Satori. Now, we had beautiful entertainment from a Jamaican treasure. We're going to have a little bit more from the Jamaican folk singers. So get ready to be entertained. Uno dead, you know? Uno clap. Jesus. Jamaican folk singers. Are they coming? Yeah, if not, you'll have to suffer with me. I think we'll take them after. Shall we do that? Right. I heard the whisper of the minister, and this minister is the lead minister for this first-time event in Jamaica. So please help me welcome. We'll come back to the entertainment. We had it before. We'll come back. Please help me bring remarks now with a welcome the Honorable Desmond McKenzie, Minister. Who do we have? All right. I am jumping. Thank you very much, Minister. Let me go back. My apologies for that. We have the United Nations Resident Coordinator ad interim and UNICEF representative, Ms. Mariko Kagoshima, bringing remarks now. Please welcome, and my apologies.
Thank you very much. I was thinking now, am I supposed to go, or am I supposed to stay, or can I listen to the music? But yeah, thank you. Honorable Dr. Nigel Clark, Member of the Parliament, Minister of Finance and the Public Service. Honorable Desmond McKenzie, Member of Parliament, Minister of Local Government and Community Development. Angela Brown-Burke, Member of Parliament representing the Leader of Opposition. His Worship, the Mayor of Senator Councillor Delroy Williams. I'm sorry, I'm from Japan, so this lots of names are a bit difficult for me. I'm trying my best. Senator Parnell Charles Jr., Minister without portfolio of Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. Senator Parnell Charles Sr., Speaker of House of Representatives, Your Excellencies and other members of Diplomatic Corps, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and greetings to you all on behalf of the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. It is my pleasure to be here with you today, representing the entire UN Jamaica family, and to launch the official website of the 7th Regional Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction with such distinguished company. The launch marks the one-year countdown to the date in which this important event will be inaugurated in Montego Bay, Jamaica. It is just over 4 years since UN member states adopted the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015-2030, the global plan to reduce disaster losses, which is fundamental to the success of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Why? The Sendai Framework recognizes that the state has the primary role to reduce disaster risk. It also acknowledges that the responsibility should be shared with other partners, including local government, the private sector, and other stakeholders. Its key outcome is for the sustainable reduction of disaster risk and losses in lives, livelihood, and health, as well as losses in the economic, physical, social, cultural, and environmental assets of persons, businesses, communities, and countries. Importantly, Sendai has 7 global targets which guide countries in their efforts to reduce disaster losses. As part of this, it is important to note that member states committed not only to reducing mortality and the number of affected people, but also the amount of direct economic loss in relation to global gross domestic product by 2030, as well as damages to critical infrastructure due to disaster. This is a clear recognition of the fact that economic growth has a direct relationship with and is necessary to achieve the SDGs. But if investment in particular, new and critical infrastructure investment, is not risk-informed, that very growth increases risk. Reducing losses at this scale will only be achieved if public and private sector work hand in hand. There's a lot to learn from these experiences, and then regional platform will be a privileged space to do so. Regional platforms create opportunities for multiple stakeholders, such as national and local governments, intergovernmental organizations, international organizations, non-governmental organizations, community organizations, scientific and academic institutions, private sector, donors, and the media come together to share experiences and knowledge and to agree on the main regional priorities for concerted action for disaster risk reduction in the Americas and the Caribbean. The 7th Regional Platform will be an opportunity for Jamaica and for the Caribbean to showcase its advances in disaster risk reduction, to inspire and be inspired by the experiences of the more than 1,000 delegates and experts who will come to Jamaica to learn, exchange, and enjoy. With 1 year ahead of us for this important event, let us all work together to make sure that we take the best out of this opportunity for us who live in Jamaica, but also to make sure participants can learn from the advances of Jamaica and the Caribbean in making our communities more resilient. Finally, on behalf of the UN system, I commend the government of Jamaica for its extraordinary leadership and commitment to host such an important event for the region and the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mariko Kagoshima, the United Nations Resident Coordinator ad interim. And now it's time for the Jamaican folk singers.
This a long time, girl, we never see you. Come make me hold your hand. This a long time, girl, we never see you. Come make me hold your hand. Feel head jump, roll, sit up, a tree top, pick off the blossom. Make me hold your hand, girl. Make me hold your hand.
This long time, girl, we never see you. Come make me walk and talk. This long time, girl, we never see you. Come make me walk and talk.
Feel head jump, roll, sit up, a tree top, pick off the blossom.
Make me hold your hand,
Girl, make me hold your hand. This a long time, girl, we never see you. Come make me wheel and turn. This a long time, girl, we never see you. Come make me wheel and turn. Feel head jump, roll, sit down, a tree top, pick off the blossom.
Make me hold your hand,
Girl, make me hold your hand.
Make me wheel and turn till we tumble down.
Make me hold your hand, girl. Make me wheel and turn till we tumble down. Make me hold your hand, yeah. Hosanna, me build me house, oh, me build it on the sandy ground, me build it on the sandy ground, the breeze come blow it down, the rain come wash it wet, me build it on the sandy ground, the rain and breeze come mash it down, it mash up, it gone. Hosanna, me build me house, oh, me build it on the rocky ground, me build it on the rocky ground, the breeze come blow on it, the rain come wet it up, me build it on the rocky ground, the rain and breeze can't mash it down,
Right through the rocky road, sing Charlie Molly call you. Right through the rocky road, sing Charlie Molly call you. Them big mouth gal, we no chat to them. Sing Charlie Molly call you. Them big mouth gal, we no chat to them. Sing Charlie Molly call you. Right through the rocky road, sing Charlie Molly call you. Right through the rocky road, sing Charlie Molly call you.
them burhead man, we no chat to them.
Sing Charlie Molly call you.
Them burhead man, we no chat to them.
Sing Charlie Molly call you. Right through the rocky road to sing Charlie Molly call you. Right through the rocky road to sing Charlie Molly call you. Them dry foot gal, we no chat to them. Sing Charlie Molly call you. Them dry foot gal, we no chat to them. Sing Charlie Molly call you.
Right through the rocky road.
Sing Charlie Molly call you.
Right through the rocky road.
Sing Charlie Molly call you. Right through the rocky road. Sing Charlie Molly call you. Right through the rocky road. Sing Charlie Molly call you.
Thank you, Jamaican folk singers. Some of the lyrics fitting, you know. And as a dry foot gal, I was thinking of the dry dams. If we don't get this climate change business sorted for the Caribbean, we're going to be having a lot of dry dams, which is why I'm delighted to bring the minister, the line minister responsible for this first in the Caribbean, Honorable Desmond McKenzie, Minister of Local Government and Community Development. Welcome the minister.
Thank you, Emily. Dr. Nigel Clark, Minister of Finance, and it is a particular reason why Dr. Clark is our guest speaker at this launch. Not because the bulk of the funding for the conference will be provided, but because of the new dispensation that has been announced by Dr. Clark as it relates to financing for disaster. Colleague Pernell Charles, both junior and senior, Speaker of the House, who was once a Minister of Local Government. Dr. Angela Brown-Burke, representing the leader of the opposition, but in her own rights, former Mayor of Kingston and the opposition spokesperson on local government. Mayors, headed by the Mayor of Kingston, councillors, members of a diplomatic corps, and I want to, in particularly, acknowledge and to again bid farewell to the outgoing U.S. Charge of the Fair, Mr. Eric Khan, who is leaving us next week and who I want to say publicly express the appreciation of the government and people of Jamaica for the work that you were able to accomplish in the field of disaster during the last 2.5 years, and I want again to publicly acknowledge and thank you. Today's launch is a significant achievement for the government and people of Jamaica. When Ronald Jackson, about a year and a half ago, asked me to take a call whether or not Jamaica would host this prestigious conference, I had some reservations because attending my first global platform meeting in Montreal in Canada, I was not too impressed with the role of the region in the deliberations because there was not enough room for expression as it relates to the region. Went to Colombia, again was not too impressed, but made a commitment that because of the importance of Jamaica and the region, that we should create the space to give us that platform for expression. Not only did the UNDRR accepted the recommendations that we made, but they went as far as to amend the name of the UNDRR and Latin America to include the Caribbean because Jamaica advocated for that change, and we are grateful for it. Today is, as I have said to the team, we have now crossed the point of no return. There is no coming back from this decision to host this conference in Montego Bay. I'm expecting that our private sector, which have started the discussions already, will not only be a major partner in terms of putting their hands in their pockets, but will also be at the table to participate in the various discussions. Today is really not my day to speak to you. Today is Minister Clark's day to speak to you. But I want to use this opportunity to say to the UNDRR and its partners that this investment in Jamaica is an investment that will pay significant dividends and will also give you broader on that investment. It is critical, therefore, and I want to use the opportunity to speak to my mayors and the disaster team in the respective municipalities about the importance of this conference, and that this has to be a united approach by the people of Jamaica. This is a conference being hosted by the people of Jamaica. So I will urge the full participation of every individual. I look in the audience and I see representatives from the various organizations which make up the National Disaster Committee, a broad-based team. And our efforts will not only ensure Jamaica's reputation is enhanced as the leading country in the region. Our demonstration of our commitment to disaster response is critical because the region takes its cue from Jamaica. And we will continue to be the leaders in the region. We will continue to play that role. And so today, I want to express my own personal appreciation publicly to the staff of the Ministry of Local Government under trying circumstances. They have been working, and we have seen the results today, and I think this is a beautiful presentation, and I want to thank the team for the excellent job that they have done. And so as we look forward to hosting this very important international event, this is the time for Jamaica to shine, and I'm sure that we will shine well beyond our capacity. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister Mackenzie. So, ACP Calvin Allen, representing the Commissioner of Police, and Brigadier Mason, representing the Chief of Defense Staff. SOE, check for next year. Make sure we're sorted there, so. Mayors, Minister of Tourism, the $30 million sign, welcome to Montego Bay, check, we're sorted there. Those who are going to do the sidewalk, make sure it's nicely whitewashed and beautiful, because we're expecting over 1,000 representatives from all across the world. We're going to show the best face of Jamaica. Right, ACP? Thank you. Now it takes cash to care. A lot of cash. Michael Leachin said 5 in 4. We're going to need 10 in 2, Minister. So we welcome at this time for the main address, Dr. the Honorable Nigel Clarke, Minister of Finance and the Public Service. Round of applause, please.
Minister of Local Government, the Honorable Desmond Mackenzie, and a former Mayor of Kingston, His Worship the Mayor, Speaker of the House of Parliament and Member of the Cabinet, Colonel Charles Sr., Colonel Charles Jr., members of the Diplomatic Corps, Senator, Dr. Angela Brown Burke, Member of Parliament, former Mayor representing the Leader of the Opposition, members of the class of mayors across Jamaica who are here today, members of the military, of the police, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is good to be here, and I think the first order of business is to say congratulations to Minister Mackenzie for this success. This success, yeah, give him a round of applause, please. Today's event, and indeed the hosting of the conference next year, speaks to Jamaica's leadership in the region as far as disaster risk reduction and management is concerned. And that leadership draws upon the reservoir of energy that Minister Mackenzie brings to bear to his public duties. And I think we should give him another round of applause for that. Like you, Minister Mackenzie, when I got invitation to something like this from a colleague cabinet minister, this is his portfolio, and he invites me to give the main address, I get the message. In the last financial year, we collaborated, and through the collaboration, we were able to reduce our streetlight arrears to 0. Up until the last financial year, we had 30 months of streetlight arrears for years going back. And, it was balanced by what they owed Petrojam as well, but it didn't change the fact, streetlight arrears going back for a long time. And through collaboration, there was a one-time $7 billion allocation to eradicate and reduce to 0 those arrears. Today we are current with JPS. And being current with JPS means that we can demand that streetlights function in communities that are vulnerable, increasing their resilience. Now, having had that success last financial year, Minister Mackenzie invites me today to speak. And I know he's a man of strategic intent. So I get the message. Minds would have been focused on the region's vulnerability and susceptibility to the risk of natural disaster over the past several years, when the incidence of natural disaster has been elevated and the severity has been aggravated. Indeed, in 2017, we would have all seen on our television screens, I believe it was 3 at the time, what could have become Category 5 hurricanes. They weren't Category 5 when we saw them, but 3 in the mid-Atlantic making their way across the northern Caribbean at the same time. It was like a picture from a Twilight Zone. Those of you who are willing to date yourselves would understand if I said it reminded me of, in the game Pac-Man, you're playing Pac-Man and then all of the ghosts come out all at once. All right? Or the early versions of Space Invaders, when, 30 megabytes of RAM was a big deal. and the Space Invader sort of video, that is what it looked like. It didn't appear to be real. And yet, the picture showed that Jamaica was in the probable path of all of those cyclones. And if we didn't get the message before, the message was certainly crystallized at that point, that the risk of natural disaster is not something that we can afford to ignore. It's a real and present danger. Now, Jamaica has done too much work. We have made too much progress in restoring fiscal sustainability and debt sustainability. We've done too much work in entrenching macroeconomic stability. We've reduced our debt from 145% of GDP to 95% of GDP. And by the way, that's a year ahead of target. When we entered into the standby facility with the IMF in 2016, the target was to get to 96% in 2020. By March 2019, we were at 95%, 1 year ahead of target. Now, having done all of that work, we cannot afford to leave ourselves exposed to the risk of natural disaster. And that is why this event today and this conference that we launch is so critically important. Now, there was a time that ministers of finance were not necessarily involved in this area and this topic of natural disaster risk reduction. It was seen as not real enough, not hard dollars and cents. And it would always at the time of a disaster is when a minister of finance would get involved. As I say, the Pac-Man and the Space Invaders would have definitely changed that paradigm as a visual. And so I was pleased earlier this year to be a part of an inaugural group of finance ministers around the world who launched a coalition of finance ministers sponsored by the World Bank as an international forum to promote coordinated strategies and coordinated response to the business of natural disaster risk reduction and risk management. By getting finance ministers involved from the planning stages a priori, we have a much better chance of dealing with this threat that we face. So the approach to natural disaster risk and its reduction, in part, relies upon building a resilient framework. And previous speakers have mentioned this, and our approach to resilience ought to be multifaceted. There is the physical resilience, or resilience of our physical infrastructure. And that is inextricably linked with our ability to finance such resilient public infrastructure, which is why the successes that Jamaica has had in restoring fiscal order are so important, and why it is crucial that we maintain those reforms and we keep on that path long into our post-program future. We've made a lot of progress with the reforms to the building code and other regulations to strengthen in the built environment. And as far as infrastructure is concerned, by releasing fiscal space that has come about as a result of our economic reforms, we've been able to allocate substantially more to capital investment in this financial year than we did only 4 years ago. Indeed, capital expenditure allocation in this financial year is 250% higher than what was spent in 2015-2016. And that deserves a round of applause. So the allocation of funding to capital expenditure to improve our infrastructure, roadways, drains, sewage, water, bridges, and so forth, but to do so in a way that is compatible with disaster minimization is a crucial part of the strategy. The government has also pursued a strategy of strengthening resilience by looking at environmental factors. And a lot of attention has been given to the redefinition of the boundaries for the cockpit country, ensuring that the watershed is protected. A lot of energy has been put behind new policies with regard to plastics, and in particular single-use plastics, ensuring that the prospect of our drains being clogged with this material at times of excess rainfall, that those possibilities are reduced. The other area of resilience clearly is the social and economic resilience, and that is that the poor and vulnerable are among the first affected and those who are most significantly affected in the event of natural disasters. As a result of that, strengthening the social safety net has been a critical part of the government strategy. Indeed, the allocation to social support has increased by over 50% since between 2015 and 2018-19. And in this financial year, our allocation to social support, the entire menu of policies that support vulnerable communities, we increased from $16 billion to $20 billion, an increase of 25% year over year. And in addition to that, the nominal increases to individual benefits under our main social protection programs increased from between 16% and 23%. Now, as much as we do on strengthening resilience and on mitigating against disaster, well, I should mention another area that, before I go on to that, another area that increased fiscal space has allowed us to do is to deal with the operational resilience, meaning our ability to respond to natural disaster event. And over the past 2 financial years, we have, among other initiatives, been able to allocate funds to our security forces that can help with providing the lift that is required in the event of natural disaster. The JDF has acquired a fleet would be much too robust a word. I think they would disagree if I use that word. But they've acquired 1 or 2. More than one. More than one. But I like the word fleet. Sounds right. A couple of Bell helicopters and other aircraft that can be extremely useful in the event of natural disaster in moving product to areas that are affected and in engaging in rescue. But as much as we do in this regard, as much as we strengthen social and economic resilience, strengthen infrastructure, strengthen the operational capacity to respond, and strengthen environmental resilience, there will always be a certain amount of risk that we cannot diversify away from. A certain amount of what we call residual risk that is extremely large, and we have to incorporate other strategies to deal with that. And the strategies that we're pursuing to deal with this large amount of residual risk that we cannot diversify away from is ensuring that we have the capacity for proper public financial management of natural disaster risk. Now, what does that mean? Our experience with natural disasters has been that we have certain categories of natural disaster events that are frequent in nature and where the damage is not going to, shut the lights down, but it is significant in terms of billions of dollars. In terms of percentage of GDP, between 0.5 and 2% of GDP, which happens on a frequent and regular basis. And then we have the experience of the large natural disaster events that occur less frequently, and then you have other events in between. When natural disaster events occur, they threaten budgetary revenues and they divert budgetary expenditure. So you spend all of this time, all of these resources, shared sacrifice, put a budget together, natural disaster event comes, and what you're planning to do to strengthen your social fabric, build schools and hospitals, gets diverted towards reconstruction and rehabilitation. And when that happens over a long period of time, and happens very often, what you end up with is an underinvestment in your social and physical environment because you have failed to plan in advance for that risk of natural disaster that you cannot get rid of. So what the government intends to do is to meet this challenge head on and plan a priori to allow us to meet the fiscal challenges posed by natural disaster events. And what we want to do is we want to ensure that we have access to non-budgetary resources that can be drawn down on, that can be utilized in the event of such occurrences. And we intend to do so by pursuing a layered approach, an approach where we build layers of financing that respond to different types of risk along the spectrum of risk possibilities, but in the event of a severe event, all of which would become available. And I just want to spend a few moments of describing what we plan to do in this, and what we are doing in this regard. The first layer, which we have had for the last several years or decades, is every year a Minister of Finance stands up in Parliament and or tables a budget that goes through Standing Finance Committee of Parliament that has an allocation towards contingencies for that year. And that allocation can be drawn upon in the event that there are unforeseen events, such as a natural disaster, to deal with. But that allocation is normally, given the pressing needs that we have in our society, that allocation historically has been fairly modest. A couple $100 million here or there that, Minister Mackenzie, rather, 2 quarters and it's done. But it's important every year to make a provision for unforeseen events for that year. We can't stop there, however, and what we plan to do is to build on layers above that. The layer above that consists of making fiscal savings or providing for fiscal savings on an annual basis that go towards a natural disaster fund, for want of a better phrase, that can only be used and drawn in the event of a natural disaster event. The framers of our Constitution were quite forward-thinking, and when Jamaica was given birth in 1962, our Constitution made provisions for something that's called a contingencies fund that the Minister of Finance can draw on in the event of unforeseen circumstances. But that contingencies fund has remained small in its allocation, meaning the size of the jacket has not changed. And in fact, by resolution, it was increased to 100 million Jamaican dollars in 1992, and it stayed at that amount until March of this year, when I moved the resolution in the House of Representatives to increase the limit from 100 million Jamaican dollars to 10 billion Jamaican dollars. And having moved the limit to 10 billion Jamaican dollars, we plan to make allocations to get up to and even beyond that amount. And we made the first such allocation in March of this year, the first time ever that Jamaica is transferring anything close to this amount of funds, to put aside, to not spend, but to put aside, to be used only in the event of natural disaster, an amount of $2 billion in March of 2019. Today, that sum sits in an account at the Bank of Jamaica being managed by the Accountant General and can only be drawn in the event of natural disaster. And this is not going to be like the Capital Development Fund, which Jamaica has had for 40 years, and which we have drawn on, and choose my words carefully, but many members of Parliament on both sides of the aisle would agree that it seems as if we have little to show for it. We're not going to make that mistake with our fiscal savings towards natural disaster. We intend to supplement the financial fiscal transfer with a legislative framework that speaks, and without the need for creating an additional public body, because that's the last thing that we need. So we're not going to expand the size of government to provide for this. However, we will have legislative rules about under what circumstances the government of the day can draw down on those funds, how those funds ought to be invested, and to be, for the purposes in which they're intended, it doesn't make sense to invest those funds in the same region that you're trying to protect. So we have to be very clear on how those funds ought to be invested, and then the process of drawing down on the funds. It's very important that when we draw down on those fiscal savings, that those go through the budgetary process. We're not setting up a parallel entity that can directly finance. The idea is you only draw down in natural disaster. Well, you put the fiscal savings aside on an annual basis as you can afford. You invest it prudently, and you do so in markets that provide some degree of diversification from the risk that you're trying to protect yourself from. You only draw down in the event of natural disaster. And when you draw it down through a budgetary process. So there's transparency on the drawdown itself and on how those funds are being used. So that represents a second plank or the second layer in our strategy for the public financial management of natural disaster risk. The third layer is one that we have had for some time, and it's the Caribbean Catastrophe Reinsurance Facility. Now, I know that for some of us in this room, yes, I know Minister McKenzie, he doesn't mind if I call his name, has been skeptical about the Caribbean Catastrophe Reinsurance Facility because it would seem as if we have had event and had event and had event, and we have not triggered a draw from that facility. However, the purpose of having a multi-layered approach is to deal with that concern, that when you have a product that helps to mitigate against the risk of natural disaster, that product is not going to be triggered on every occasion. That product sits in a certain space on the quadrant of severity of risk and frequency of risk, and it has its purpose. And the fact that we have not triggered it yet doesn't mean that it doesn't have its purpose. So it fits within our strategic layers and has the capacity to pay out significant sums if we have an event that triggers it, and it's a very important part. On top of that layer, we negotiated last year with the Inter-American Development Bank a $285 million contingent credit claim. What that provides for is, in the event of a natural disaster, and this is done already and available to Jamaica, in the event of a natural disaster that meets certain thresholds, Jamaica can immediately draw on $285 million from the IDB within days of such an occurrence, without the need for, at that time, any loan, any processing, or any sort of heavy diligence that takes a long time. It's pre-approved and ready in the event of a natural disaster occurrence. And then, on top of that, we are in the process of working with the World Bank on a risk transfer instrument, which would be the first such instrument to be applied, certainly within the CARICOM space, and possibly within the Caribbean. And the idea behind that is to protect Jamaica from the worst possible natural disaster event. When a natural disaster event like the one that we're envisioning for this instrument occurs, it's the emergency losses that matter. It's the emergency losses that can derail our fiscal trajectory and land us back into high debt. Emergency losses are those that you cannot avoid. Those who remember Gilbert. Everybody remember Hurricane Gilbert? Everybody remember that after Hurricane Gilbert, there was a plane stuck in a willow tree by Palisados. Anybody remembers that? The pictures still survive of this plane that was carried by the force of the winds into the air, landed on a very strong branch of a tree. And does everybody remember that it stayed there for a while? It wasn't taken down the next day. It wasn't taken down the next month. It wasn't taken down, I believe it might have been there for as long as a year. Because, and it was not in the reach of individuals, who could be threatened by it. Because it was not an emergency loss. It would require expenditure to move it. You have to get a crane and so forth. But it was not an emergency. Where the money went immediately was on the emergencies. The fact that you had people living in low-lying areas whose habitats were destroyed by the hurricane. That you had bridges that connected communities that, if they weren't repaired, would have a significant economic effect. Money went towards roofs that had blown off of public buildings and hospitals. And it is those emergency expenses which, in a natural disaster, you have to. You come to me as Minister of Finance, I have no choice. I have to find the money to deal with those emergencies. And it's when you're in a position that you have emergencies that you must attend to. That is where your greatest exposure, our greatest exposure, lies. Because if you haven't planned adequately for it, it means that your debt is going to go up. And your debt is going to go up at precisely the wrong time. Because your risk goes up, interest rates will go up, and you land yourself in an economic sort of storm that complements the natural disaster storm that you've just been through. As a result of that, we want to pursue with the World Bank a layer that involves risk transfer, transferring the risk of such an event to parties that are willing to take it on. And various instruments exist to do this. And one of those instruments is a catastrophe bond, where investors receive what looks like premium, but they're called coupons. And in the event of a natural disaster occurrence, they pay over the principal to the counterparty. And that's why it's called a bond, a catastrophe bond. That requires a lot of detailed modeling and a lot of discovery, so to speak. And we are fortunate enough to have the assistance of the World Bank, who are providing technical resources to help us with the modeling exercise and put us in a place that we can go to the market and place this instrument. Now, such an instrument will require premium to be paid over time, and that competes for budgetary space with all the other expenses that government has to address. And for that reason, until our fiscal space opens up some more, we are seeking to work with our bilateral partners to assist us in the premium that would be required, or the coupons that would be required for such a catastrophe bond. And while I'm not in a position to specifically mention the progress that we've made in this regard, I can say that our strategic efforts in this area have met on fertile ground, and we have received strong supporting, not only words, but from our bilateral partners, and I fully expect that they will assist us in this regard, with us obviously having some skin in the game and using some of our own resources to pay the premium that are involved. Because having made all the progress that we have made, we are about to exit a program with the International Monetary Fund in November of this year. There's no way that we can leave ourselves entirely exposed. We must pursue such a layered approach with a risk transfer instrument on the top that protects us against the possibility of the worst possible storms. Now, when you put the package together, your annual budgetary allocation, your fiscal savings in some kind of national disaster risk fund, your contingent, your Caribbean Catastrophe Reinsurance facility, your contingent credit claim, which is $300 million, and your Catastrophe Bond, which would be another several hundred million. The idea is to have available to Jamaica up to $1 billion of non-budgetary emergency funding that can be available in the worst possible event. And that is the strategic intent. That is the strategic direction. It's not something that the government can do on its own. And indeed, we have launched a process of developing a public financial management for natural disaster risk policy. And the persons who are leading that policy development have met with stakeholders across the society. Many of you in this room have probably met with that group. And the idea is to table a policy that incorporates some of the elements that I've mentioned in addition to other elements that I haven't had time to go into. And as we develop that policy, to continue to pursue the layers that I described, and in particular work on that risk transfer instrument, which we intend to do with the World Bank and with the support of our bilateral partners. Because Jamaica is not going to leave anything to chance. For this period of prosperity that we have to last long into the future, not only do we have to continue the reforms and continue to build and strengthen our institutions and continue to abide by our own fiscal rules, but we also have to manage our exposure to risk, of which natural disaster risk is chief among the ones that we face. So, Minister, thank you for this opportunity to share what our strategic approach is, and I look forward to the cooperation of everyone here as Jamaica looks to preserve the gains long into the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nigel Clark, Finance Minister and the Public Service. And it all hangs together very well. And I look forward to the presentations 2020, the building on the plan set by the Minister, and the announcement post IMF. We're here for this moment, the official unveiling of the Regional Platform 2020 website. Please help me welcome Mr. Nahuel Arenas, Deputy Chief Regional Office for the Americas and the Caribbean from the UN Office for Disaster Reduction, for the unveiling.
Ministers Clark and Mackenzie, let me observe all protocol. I have the honor to have been invited to take you briefly through the webpage, but before doing that, I want, on behalf of the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, commend Jamaica for taking up this challenge of putting up this important event for the whole region, for the whole hemisphere, for the leadership of Jamaican, particularly for the leadership of Minister Mackenzie, for making this happen, for ensuring that this is part of the agenda of the cabinet, for harnessing the political support and making sure that everybody understands why this matter is very important. The regional platform is not just an event, it is a catalyzer to raise awareness of the importance of reducing the risk of disasters. And I also want to commend Minister Clark for acknowledging and underlining the importance of the engagement of the finance actors in disaster risk reduction. Minister Clark has made a very clear point that reducing the risk of disasters generates dividends that can be reinvested in growth. And growth cannot be sustainable if it's not resilient to disasters. And finally, I want to also thank and commend CDEMA and Mr. Ronald Jackson, CDEMA's co-organizer of this event, for its leadership, ensuring that the voices of the Caribbean people are heard about this important matter. For many of these islands and territories, it's a matter of survival. So thank you for that. I understand that before taking you, in my country they say brief and good is twice as good. So I don't know if it's going to be good, but it's going to be brief. It's also going to be good because there has been a lot of effort put behind this, which marks 1 year to this important event. I have the honor to, first of all, introduce a recorded message from the Prime Minister of Jamaica, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness.
Jamaica is truly grateful for the opportunity to host, for the first time in the Caribbean, the 7th Regional Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction in the Americas and the Caribbean, under the theme, Building Resilient Economies in the Americas and the Caribbean. The Caribbean is one of the most vulnerable regions to extreme weather events and seismic activities. For the period 1998 to 2017, countries impacted by disasters reported direct economic losses valued at $2.9 billion US. Losses reported from extreme weather events rose by 151% when compared to the previous 20-year period. The region accounts for 53% of global economic losses reported in the last 20 years as a result of climate-related disasters. Small island states of the Caribbean account for the largest portion of costs relative to the size of their economies. The 7th Regional Platform, scheduled for July 8 to 10, 2020 at the Montego Bay Convention Center, is taking place at a critical time as the world grapples with extreme weather events driven by climate change, amplifying the impacts of floods, droughts, and heat waves which threaten lives and economies, ultimately undermining our ability to achieve economic growth. The call to action is now. The hosting of the regional platform in Jamaica is aimed at raising awareness of the increasing economic and human cost of disasters and the special challenges facing small island developing states. As Prime Minister and Chairman of the National Disaster Risk Management Council, I am confident that the Honorable Desmond Mackenzie, Minister of Local Government and Community Development, who is spearheading this conference, will ensure that this will be a platform to deliberate best practices on disaster risks and the associated issues. Join us in the tranquil and scenic Montego Bay, St. James for the 7th Regional Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction in the Americas and the Caribbean. We look forward to the exchange.
Now briefly take you through the webpage that is the result of a concerted effort of Minister Mackenzie's team, other institutions in Jamaica, such as the GIS, CDEMA and the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. Very briefly and informally, the landing page, we have the theme of the platform, building resilient economies. I think, again, the case has been made today of why this theme is very timely and appropriate for the times we are living. There are 3 banners. The second banner is a short video of what's the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, this global agreement adopted by member states in 2015. Next banner underlines the important role of women for disaster risk reduction. You can see there's many different segments of the webpage, but if we scroll down, we will see the invitation from the Most Honorable Prime Minister, the invitation from the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction, Mami Misutori, and we have, I invite you all in your time to look at this brief video put together by Jamaica, giving the background of this event. If we, on the right-hand side, you have the media feeds of the 3 main organizing institutions, the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development, the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, and CDEMA. So every time that you go in, you will receive the latest updates from these 3 institutions. If we scroll down, you will have a direct access to the latest announcements and news. You will have key information such as the concept note, the agenda of the platform when it's ready, some background documents like the Regional Action Plan for the implementation of the Sendai Framework in the Americas and the Caribbean, Jamaica Disaster Risk Management Act, CDEMA's Caribbean Pathway for Disaster Resilience, the Regional Comprehensive Disaster Management Strategy, and so on and so forth. And there's other background documents scrolling down that take you to what came out of the Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction, which is an important precedent for the regional ones, and as well as for those who want to experience what a regional platform is. We have a video that was produced at the 6th regional platform that was held in Colombia, and you will see also the address of the former president of Colombia and Nobel Prize awardee Juan Manuel Santos, as well as a snapshot of the event. We won't go through all of it, but the program will be uploaded when it's ready. There is a regional advisory committee that is working on putting up the most pertinent and appropriate agenda for this discussion. At the logistics segment, participants will have all access to all of the required information for processing the visas, for the recommended hotels, for accessibility. This has been a tremendous effort from Jamaica to put together all this information for today's event. And if we go back to the, we have a section on registration. Registration will be opened closer to the event, but all the information will be there. We have a section for media and journalists who will have special badges with special access to the event. And if we can go to the partners section, we have here an acknowledgement of the partners and the donors that are supporting this effort. First of all, the government of Jamaica, but also some donors as the European Commission, the USAID, OFDA, the Swiss government, and we hope to populate this page with many other logos and names of companies and partners that will contribute to this important event. So with that, I invite you to go through it, to stay alert of the news that we will be posting there. Again, it's not just an event, it's a catalyzer of raising awareness about the importance of this subject. This will also come with a lot of activities that will be run at the national level, at the regional level, with the youth, with women's groups, with groups of people living with disabilities, and other groups to raise awareness about their different and special perspectives. Thank you very much for having us. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you, Mr. Arenas. All that's left for me to say is it has been my pleasure being your moderator. Congratulations to the Ministry of Local Government for putting forward this seamless program for the event coming up next year. And we will have refreshments in the room next door right after the vote of thanks to be done by Mrs. Marsha Henry Martin, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development. Have a good morning. I'm Emily Shields. Here's the Permanent Secretary.
All protocols observed. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I see Minister look on his time, it's 2 minutes past 12. So good afternoon. So I think we are on good timing. We have come to the end of a very, very audacious occasion. What can I say? I am indeed happy to see that we have reached this milestone, and we could not have done it without the help of several of our stakeholders and partners. So the task is mine this afternoon on behalf of the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development to express my sincere gratitude to a team of persons who have worked so hard to make today's occasion a success. The 7th Regional Platform, as you know, is being celebrated under the theme, Building Resilient Economies for the Americas and the Caribbean. Today's website launch is a significant milestone as we prepare for this occasion in 2020. This occasion plans to bring over 1,000 participants from more than 50 countries within this hemisphere. As such, I must first thank Mrs. Emily Crookshield for so conscientiously bringing us through today's proceedings. Madam, your insights in disaster management concepts are astounding. I assure you that by 2020, we'll be very well alive to see it to the end. Reverend Astor Carlyle, thank you for your invocation. The presence of the Holy Spirit is always needed to guide us. Your words of wisdom reminded us that the personality and the hands of God are critical to the shaping of our economies. May your prayers, sir, for equity and sustainability be fulfilled. Your Worship, the Mayor, Senator Councillor Delroy Williams, my good friend, the city of Kingston continues to be a leading city in a number of areas. Sir, through your welcome remarks, you reminded of the necessity for creating integrated, livable spaces that will support risk reduction. Your recommendation and calls for an integrated approach, a multi-agency approach, was not lost on us. And we certainly recognize the vitality of social cohesion to disaster risk reduction. And of course, as we waited to hear from Mr. Ronald Jackson from CDEMA, we were charged to expect great things. Sir, that you underscore the mayor's call for a better urban and integrated planning system must not be missed. Through your comments, you reiterated the need for strengthened partnerships while recognizing the significance of having Jamaica, the Caribbean, in hosting this very important platform for the very first time. Through your sharing, we were reminded that resilience must be truly transformational. As there is indeed a link between disaster, development, and poverty, we have taken this on. And to our UN friends, and I call you family today, to the UN Secretary General, the resident coordinator to Jamaica, to Noel, we have developed such a bond. What can I say? I call you family today, friends, and the entire UNDRR's team. Please accept our sincere appreciation for your confidence in Jamaica and for your endorsement to host this very important conference. This conference, as you rightly indicated, is geared at assessing the region's present status in implementing some key conventions and agreements in the face of climate change and escalating events. As I said before, this conference will target a number of participants. And I listened keenly because you made the point about greater ambition across the region for achieving the 7 targets as it relates to the Sendai framework. Jamaica is committing to creating and delivering a conference that will practically and realistically review our progress as it relates to these frameworks. We also know that this is best achieved through public and private sector partnerships and working together. The role of each stakeholder must also be highlighted. And how could I forget the Jamaican folk singers? You reminded us, I think they're on the outside, but they reminded us of long time gal me never see you. You must have built your house on sandy ground. They moved from dry foot gal to Burhead man to coming through the rocky road to give us quite an entertaining event. Thank you. To my own minister, the Honorable Desmond Mackenzie. Sir, it's always a pleasure working with you. You continue to reiterate and call for a space for the Caribbean and for Jamaica to have a voice in these conferences. You continue to remind of the need to be proactive and yet to be responsive, always challenging the team to deliver a high-quality output. Your continued voicing for full participation from all stakeholders, local representatives, cannot be overstated. Jamaica must be the leading country in ensuring reduced risk reduction within the region. And to you, Dr. the Honorable Nigel Clark, sir, we got an economic lesson today. I listened intently. Excellent presentation, sir. Your discourse demonstrated your clear understanding of the issues at hand and the inextricable link of disasters, development to our economic growth and prosperity. I want to say to you, sir, we at the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development remains committed to the cause and commit to partner with your ministry to ensure that we fulfill these obligations. Finally, to you, our various representatives here today, for your presence, it is a clear demonstration of the partnership and collaboration that is possible for us. I want to express sincere gratitude for being here today. And to my own team, the Interministerial Committee and the Planning Committee, thank you so much for ensuring, Ms. McDonald, I really want to recognize you this morning. Thank you so much. When I was going to bed at 12 early this morning and I sent an email, I saw her answer, P.S. it's already done. And then when I called her early this morning, she said, P.S. it's 5 o'clock I left. I said, Lord, Delia, excellent, and team, excellent. I really want to express appreciation to you as we look forward to having, and to the media too, who are here. Thank you for being here. We look forward to an excellent conference in July of next year, and we're anticipating to see you all. Have a very, very good day.
Thank you, Mrs. Marsha Henry Martin. I've just come back to tell you the website, the address for the website, so you can log on and register closer to the time. So it is, you know, we have a way of saying www. But we really don't need to say it because it's on the World Wide Web. But it's EIRD. So that's Echo, India, Romeo, Delta.org/Americas, PR, that's Papa Romeo, 2020. So log on and see you next year. Have a good afternoon.